this is not being reported. We, the West, are sleepwalking into the abyss.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for May 27th through June 3rd, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 2023 1-ounce Gold Britannia at just $59 over spot. We also have backdated silver 1-ounce Kangaroos at $3.10 over spot. And finally, we have the hard-to-find silver half-ounce Canadian polar bears at the very competitive price of just $2.50 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend Doomberg from the very popular Doomberg Substack, the #1 paid financial contributor on Substack. Doomberg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Elijah, great to be back with you again. So much going on, and I know we got a lot to talk about.
Well, it's great to have you today. What I did want to discuss is really the rising metal prices we've been seeing recently in gold and silver. Silver has obviously broken above that critical $30 level a couple weeks ago, and gold, really close to all-time highs, made new all-time highs above 2,400. Your take on the main drivers of precious metals right now?
Yeah, as we've discussed before, I think, gold is the one major asset in my portfolio where I get a little uncomfortable if it goes up too fast, because it usually signals some deeper societal problem that I'm hedging against. And gold, in our view, is a great medium for saving, but also a bit of a hedge. And hedges, are the types of things that you don't expect or want to pay off, like insurance, for example. Gold has pulled back a little bit from the highs, as you say. It's about $100 an ounce off those highs, which actually is testimony to just how big of a run that gold has been on. That $100 an ounce move in gold in the past 2 weeks isn't really making all that much in the way of headlines. And when Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard, the price of gold was $35 an ounce, I believe it was. And so I think the movement in gold, and to a lesser extent, but a related extent, silver, are really testimony to the ongoing geopolitical tensions in the world, the drive of the U.S. foreign policy driving Russia and China together. I think the summit of Putin in Beijing with Xi Jinping was historic. I think it's one of those events that is being wildly underplayed in the Western media, but 20 years from now, historians will look back at that day as a seminal moment when Xi Jinping hugged Putin not once but twice, coming off the heels of the really embarrassing treatment of Tony Blinken when he went to go see the Chinese senior leadership just days before, is testimony to just how broken the relationship is between the G7 and, frankly, the rest of the world. I mean, I think if you look at various votes in the United Nations and even at the Security Council, and the global South is aligning with the BRICS countries, and there's a slow-moving train of gold becoming ever more important as a neutral reserve asset in the settlement of international trade, displacing U.S. treasuries in that regard. And so I think, the speed of the move is a bit unsettling, but I don't think people who are in and around the gold market are totally surprised by its decoupling from real rates in the U.S., for example. I just think that we are, this time is different. Every new time is different, but I do think that, we're seeing, especially as the U.S. fiscal situation continues to devolve and the U.S. political situation continues to heat up, a sort of a flight to quality trade back into gold is pretty real.
And yeah, it seems like that is especially happening in the East. What do you make of, I guess, when it comes to gold, the balance of gold between these nations, right? So if you look at the official numbers, the U.S. still has more gold than all the BRICS nations combined. What's reported, I think it's about 8,000 tons versus about 6,000 tons. What do you make of those official numbers? Do you think they're underreported in the East and maybe overreported in the West? And what is the significance of, how much gold the East actually has?
All I could look at are the prices on my Bloomberg, and I see that there's a steady premium for physical gold in Shanghai, and we see Western-based ETFs that hold gold being drained. And, if you're China or you're other members of the BRICS, you'd probably want to hide just how much gold you're buying until you're done doing the buying. This is very common when, people are trying to accumulate a position or sell off a position, that the fact that the market knows that you're participating is itself market moving and can be, self-fulfilling in a negative way. So I don't really put much faith in the official numbers, even the US numbers. I mean, who knows how much gold we really have? When was the last time we had a full audit? But the premium is real. It's a little lower than it was, which explains a bit of the sell-off in gold, in my view. I wake up every day, and on my Bloomberg, we have these things called a launch pad, where in my case, I have 12 charts that automatically pop up every time I sign into Bloomberg. And on the far right side of the charts is the Japanese yen, the gold price, as measured in dollars per ounce, and then the physical premium in Shanghai. Those are the three things that I watch right now. I think what's going on in Japan is also potentially influential in the gold markets for a variety of reasons. If you plot the price of gold and Japanese yen, that has been an incredible hedge for the citizens of that country, as their currency has weakened markedly, probably 30% since this latest sort of episode began to unfold in that country. And so, I don't want to wake up with gold at $5,000 an ounce, 5,000 US dollars an ounce, because that implies other things about my portfolio. But if I do wake up and gold is at $5,000 an ounce, I'm going to be glad that I own as much as I do.
Now, when it comes to these escalating tensions, it seems between the East and West, and also, I mean, right now we have two wars going on, and it seems like there might be a third war starting with Taiwan sometime soon. How do you think this is going to impact this East versus West split?
It's only going to accelerate it, it would seem. I'm very puzzled by the strategy of the NATO countries, and the G7, the Atlanticist, or whatever you want to call them, both with regards to Russia. And then, given our relative inability to supply weapons needed to keep Ukraine on a level footing with the Red Army, why it is that we seem to be, provoking conflict with China over the Taiwan issue. It's bizarre to me. I don't understand it. I must clearly be missing some critical piece of information. But I do think that, all roads lead to gold in this case. If tensions are going to explode, I think that during times of high uncertainty, people like to own tangible things that they know will preserve value. And again, I don't think we should minimize the dangerous political situation that is unfolding in the U.S. Whatever your views from a partisan perspective, to have the nominee of one of the major parties convicted by attorney generals of the other in the middle of a presidential election is it's emerging market stuff. This is not the stuff that happens to empires that are still on the ascent. This is really, I think, a very dangerous time. Both sides of the aisle view what has transpired this week through utterly orthogonal lenses. It is deeply bearish for societal cohesion. And, when you're running, $1 trillion in new debt every 90 days, deep corruption in DC, military industrial complex out of control, wars breaking out overseas, and lawfare is becoming normalized. The thing that doesn't, I think people really internalize, someday the other party will regain power. This is a sword that cuts both ways. And it's really disturbing. Again, whatever your views of Donald Trump, the man, it's not a good look. The rest of the world looks at what's going on in the US and says, oh, I recognize that pattern. And at a minimum, they're saying to themselves, maybe they had believed that the US was a very great and safe place for their capital because we have the rule of law, equal justice under the law and all of these things. Maybe now they're saying, oh, no, okay, this is no different than the emerging economy that I grew up in. I know this pattern. I know how this story plays out. Maybe I need to move my capital out of the US banking system. And it wouldn't take much of that to precipitate a crisis. And so it's a very dangerous game. Same dangerous game we're playing with seizing of Russian reserve assets. Other countries look at that and say there might come a day where I will run afoul of what the NATO countries believe should be our national strategy. And I don't want to have too much risk exposure to the euro or the US dollar and so on. Even the Japanese have to look at this situation and scratch their head a bit. I mean, they are getting LNG from Russia. They need it. We were once at war with Japan. It's not inconceivable that they would look at this situation and say, "Gee, maybe we ought to reconsider the alliances that we have right now." So I think it's just a very, very dangerous time, and I'm quite comfortable with the significant gold allocation that I have in my personal portfolio.
One of the articles you released recently, I believe at the beginning of the month, was how the sanctions against Russia backfired. And you've been talking about this for quite a while. And it seems like it's actually coming to pass where we're actually seeing the Russian economy do quite well in the midst of these sanctions. So as we look at the real impact of this East-West divide, the sanctions on Russia, seizing Russian assets, the political instability in the U.S., for those living in the U.S., what is the real impact to their daily lives, their financial lives, that all of this is going to have?
This is the thing that surprises me, Elijah. When the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, it was wall-to-wall front page news. Okay. We are actively contemplating sending NATO troops into Ukraine and permitting NATO to fire long-range ballistic missiles into Russia, which can only really be done with the explicit help of NATO soldiers and officers. And Vladimir Putin, whatever you think of him, has made it crystal clear many times that this is a deep and serious red line and that the West should expect a nuclear response. And we are sleepwalking into the abyss on this matter. You can't really see any coverage of it in the US. You turn on Fox or CNN or MSNBC or read the Washington Post or the New York Times. Nobody's talking about the fact that just this week, Vladimir Putin held a press conference where he effectively, explicitly warned that a global conflict would arise if the US and its allies crossed that red line. And by the way, if we were fighting a war in Mexico and Russia was providing ballistic missiles to whoever we would be fighting in such a war, and they were firing them into the US, we would be threatening nuclear war. Like, Russia is a nuclear superpower. They're one of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. I don't think it is, unpatriotic to point out that we may be making a mistake in the same way we've been pointing out that the sanctions would backfire. Like, say what you want about Putin. He has been very clear. And I would say if the tables were reversed, we would be just as clear. The reason that we had a missile crisis over Cuba was because of its proximity to the United States. Russia shares a border with Ukraine. If we're funneling ballistic missiles into Ukraine and then pretending like the officers from our country are acting as volunteers, and then they're firing these missiles 200-300 kilometers into Russia, attacking refineries or attacking nuclear early warning systems, for example, which has been happening and it's not being really reported over here, we would be throwing a fit. Why is it that we expect that Putin wouldn't? And perhaps the people who are doing this are hoping that he throws a fit, because in some bizarre world, escalating the war with Russia is somehow viewed as a positive thing. I don't understand it. I'm missing something critically important. Far too few people in the country realize what their leaders are getting themselves into. And it's a very, very dangerous game.
Either we're missing something, right? Or world leaders are just completely talking past each other and don't understand where the other, I mean, obviously, in the case of war, they don't understand where the other is coming from. But
look, Putin has been very clear. In fact, again, another radically underreported story. 2 weeks ago, he called into, called the ambassadors of France and the UK in Moscow into the foreign secretary's office in Moscow and read them the Riot Act and gave them an explicit warning that they knew what was going on, and if it continued, there would be consequences, i.e., Russia would feel as though it were empowered to attack British and French military bases all over the world, including in Britain and France proper. And like, this warning was explicit. The readout from the Russian Foreign Ministry on this meeting makes it very clear what happened. Like, this is not being reported. We, the West, are sleepwalking into the abyss. I'm old enough to remember when one of the main drivers for implementing, anti-nuclear proliferation treaties was because we all understood that once a country attained the nuclear bomb, you had to treat them differently. The U.S. is not going to win a kinetic war over Russia because the day before we declare victory, Russia's going to nuke us. And are we prepared for that? By the way, we would do the same. We would not tolerate what's going on in the U.S. If the similar things. And look, if you're in Ukraine, I understand how this all sounds, relatively U.S.-centric. And believe me, the biggest victims in all of this are the people in Ukraine. And what Putin is doing is dastardly. I believe there are severe war crimes being undertaken, carpet bombing of villages, targeting the civilian energy infrastructure. All of these things are real. I don't deny them. They're serious. War is serious. War is no fun. But from the U.S. perspective, is Ukraine worth getting into a nuclear war over? They're not in NATO. There's no Senate-passed treaty where we've committed to defend them. And it's clearly far more existential to Russia than it is to us. And it's a real tragedy what's been transpiring over there.
The way that people can prepare for this is obviously holding hard assets. But I think you've also talked about, other forms of preparedness. What is your perspective, kind of the mindset? Because obviously World War III is not something that any of us want and none of us can really prepare for. But how can people keep a level head in this situation?
I think the first thing they can do is become informed, which is why we wrote a piece called Mapping the War, how to find out what's really going on in Ukraine, where we talked about how to navigate through the bias of what's available on social media and try your best to uncover the truth. You can hold real assets. You can buy potassium iodide tablets. I own some, but ultimately it's pretty hard to hedge against, a thermonuclear war. The best way to hedge against thermonuclear war is to work to avoid them. And, talk to your congressperson, find out what their policy is. Are we going to send U.S. troops and treasure to defend Ukraine? I mean, we're sending a lot of treasure. Are we going to send U.S. troops? And we've spent scores of billions of dollars on this adventure. Can we have a conversation about that? Has Congress declared war on Russia? There's a constitutional way for the U.S. to get involved in a war. We've just ignored all of that, and we've normalized such adventures. This is not, pacifism or isolationism. This is constitutionalism. We have a method to decide collectively as a people whether we want to be involved in a kinetic conflict with a nuclear superpower. Why don't we use it? And by the way, let's see which of our leaders who have gotten us into this entanglement are willing to send their own children overseas to fight and die in this war. It's a very, very, very dangerous time. And to your specific question of how individuals who are listening prepare themselves, I mean, that's certain things you can't hedge against, Elijah. And I think this is clearly one of them. I mean, there's only so much potassium iodide that you can take when the mushroom cloud is on the horizon.
No, that's very true. And I think there are going to be financial aspects to this, and there has been with respect to energy prices as well. If we could move to that, I know you focus on energy quite a bit. So as we see these escalating tensions around the world, how do you see that impacting energy prices? And also in the U.S., should people expect probably higher energy prices in the future? Your take.
So when I look at the energy complex, it of course has considerations beyond the geopolitical. There is still a shrinking geopolitical risk premium in the price of oil, which we sort of measure by comparing, Brent or WTI to 6 times the price of landed natural gas, and that gap is shrinking. Landed liquefied natural gas cargoes of LNGs, because they kind of do the same thing in these markets, and they should sell for the same price. That the shrinking of the geopolitical risk premium is something we take comfort in. Perhaps the market is discounting that we will walk away from the edge, and that, for example, the response from France and England to that warning seems to have been an overt attempt to at least temporarily de-escalate. But overall, the energy markets are relatively well supplied. I mean, natural gas in the U.S. is off the mat. It's now up to $250 from a low of $150 when we wondered whether we might not have seen the bottom a couple of pieces ago. But if you just look at the front month spread in the oil markets, which is the the current contract to 1 month out, what that spread says is that there's not much in the way of tightness in the physical markets because that spread is collapsing. It was, a dollar a barrel, at the end of March, and now it's looking today at WTI front month spread is 29 cents. That means there's no urgency in getting physical oil delivered in the now that you promise to pay back 30 days from now. And crack spreads are off their highs as well. They're, cut in half from the highs that we're seeing in August of 2023. And so I think, obviously, oil is a managed market. OPEC has substantial sway in the pricing, but we're seeing a bit of softness in the oil space. And we do believe that if we had no wars, oil would be trading significantly lower. So to the extent that oil is a proxy for the market's assessment of expanding geopolitical risk, it seems like we've taken a bit of risk off in the past 4 days. Oil is down $5 a barrel. Spreads continue to collapse, and crack spreads are very well maintained. And so, and of course, gold's pulled back too. And gold is another geopolitical indicator alongside energy. And so I hope that the market is correct, that it is sniffing out that the U.S. is not going to engage in World War III. All bets are off if something breaks out with China, which we really haven't talked too much about, but that's the next big risk domino to potentially fall, and one to keep a close eye on.
And what are the specific signals you might be looking at with respect to Taiwan that would signal a conflict ahead?
So I'm sure, as you know, because you're a faithful reader of Doomberg, we've written a couple of pieces on China's mission to become self-sufficient in the semiconductor space. And we have a bit of a a bit out of the box view on the matter, which is that the fact that China is not yet self-sufficient in semiconductors and is beholden to the Taiwanese for this critical input into their economy is a barrier for them flexing their military muscles. And that one of the reasons why Xi Jinping has made this one of the top 2 or 3 national objectives of the entire Chinese Communist Party is because once they become self-sufficient in semiconductors, and we've outlined in very detailed ways, both in a piece called Chip Shots and another one called The Greater Fools, how the Chinese are pulling out all the stops, bribery, blackmail, spying, to become self-sufficient, and we predict they will. And we wonder whether they might not already be, given some of the things we're seeing in the market vis-a-vis NVIDIA and China flexing its muscle with this recent military drill, and China brushing off Anthony Blinken and basically daring him to do something about their relationship with Russia, and then hugging Putin twice for the cameras to see. These are all signs of a leadership that believes it has cracked an important milestone on their journey to self-sufficiency. And if China does no longer need Taiwan, but the rest of the world still does, Taiwanese control over that aspect of the semiconductor supply chain pivots from a barrier to China making a military move to a motivator. And that's a very dangerous situation because the U.S. is not going to become self-sufficient in semiconductors. We're wasting tens of billions of dollars. We don't have the people. It's just not going to happen. And so this is something we're following very carefully, something that we think is a very dangerous development that isn't on too many people's radar. And then that's the type of thing that we like to write about, of course, as you know, here at Doomberg.
Now, coming full circle here back to the precious metal markets, I know there's been a divide right between the West and the East as well in that market with respect to the pricing. And we've talked about this before. But your take on this latest, where the silver price seems to be multiple dollars above what we see in the West on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So do you see that as sustainable, and how do you see that impacting the flows of metals, the flow of metal from west to east?
Well, silver's complicated by the fact that it's not a pure monetary metal. It's also an industrial metal, and the main use for it today is in the production of solar cells and solar cell production, solar panel production, both polysilicon and ignits and wafers and cells is dominated by China. And so a premium to physical in the silver market that arises in China probably has more of an economic explanation than a geopolitical one. And also, I would say that silver is to gold what natural gas is to oil. It's just a harder commodity to trade. It's sort of a widowmaker amongst the quote unquote precious metals. It's very volatile. for reasons I don't fully understand. But it's always been that when people get super juiced about silver, a lot of people lose a lot of money, and vice versa. And so it's just we watch it. We don't watch it nearly as closely as gold. And I do think one needs to ponder the economic outlet for newly produced silver, for example, which is far less of an issue with gold. And so they're related but different enough that I don't know that movements in silver can necessarily be an input into potential future movements in gold.
Now, there is still, it seems like, premium on gold occasionally in the Asian market. Do you see a tension arising there between the East and West?
Well, the West is in a bit of a pickle because for decades they have conditioned their societies via propaganda that gold is not money, and gold is the pet rock, and the Federal Reserve has not even revalued the gold that it owns on its books, such that the equity deficit in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet is more than covered by the 8,000 ounces of gold, that they have, but they're carrying it at the old price. I think like $35 an ounce. And so, on the one hand, we have been propagandized for decades to think that gold is irrelevant. So all of a sudden, if it is relevant, then that bit flip might be quite material. This flow of gold out of the Western ETFs, while gold, the price of gold is rising, has caught a lot of people's attention. The belief that the paper markets are used to suppress the price of gold arises from the assumption that Western central bankers do not want the dollar price of gold to run too wild because they view that as feeding into inflation expectations, which could become self-fulfilling. When such paradigms switch, they tend to switch all at once, which is why I started by, I mentioned earlier that I don't want to wake up and see $5,000 an ounce gold, because that is going to mark a significant paradigm shift. And the net effect of that shift will be negative for my standard of living. I will be hedged, perhaps better than most, perhaps better than my neighbors. But that's small solace. I would prefer, in absolute terms, a better standard of living. I would prefer peace over war. I would prefer prosperity over struggle. I would prefer health over disease. Like, these are all very common things. Success for my friends and family. Who amongst us is looking for a war other than the leaders who might profit from it? It's just truly a sort of scary time to watch.
It is a scary time, but we all pray for peace, obviously, in the world. And if our viewers are interested in continuing to track this, to stay informed, as you mentioned, is the most important thing right now. Where can they go to find you? It's doomberg.substack.com, but maybe tell our viewers what they'll find there.
Yeah, Doomberg.com is the easiest way. We bought that domain name. You'll find all of our articles here. We don't just write about energy or gold. We also just published a piece this morning, for example, on cancer, which is something that we have some expertise in and that we've been studying for a long time. And our first real deep dive into the world of cancer treatments and pharmaceuticals. We published that this morning. I think your listeners might be interested to read that. We publish 7-8 times a month. We have a pro tier where we also publish a deep webinar once a month for that tier at a higher price that is available as well. And Elijah, I really enjoy our end of week discussions. You're almost always the last thing on my agenda before the weekend. And so not only is it great to talk to you, but when we're done, I have the weekend to look forward to. So it's really great and happy to be back on with you again.
Well, thank you so much, Doomberg. It's a pleasure to have you on always. Our viewers very much appreciate your time. And yeah, thank you so much, and God bless.
Same to you.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for May 27th through June 3rd, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 2023 1-ounce Gold Britannia at just $59 over spot. We also have backdated silver 1-ounce Kangaroos at $3.10 over spot. And finally, we have the hard-to-find silver half-ounce Canadian polar bears at the very competitive price of just $2.50 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.